Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In recent days, alarm bells have been sounded by Germany's intelligence leadership. A senior German spy chief has warned that an assault by Russia on NATO might not be mere speculation. He suggests it could be inevitable. Today, we unpack what this claim means, how credible it is, and what the wider implications are for Europe, defense strategy, and global security. Let's begin by laying out what has been publicly said. In October 2024, Bruno Kahl, the head of Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service, told the Bundestag's Control Committee that Russia could carry out an attack on NATO by the end of this decade. He also cautioned that Moscow's ongoing hybrid warfare, including cyber attacks, sabotage, espionage, and what he terms little green men, might one day push NATO to trigger Article 5, the alliance's collective defense clause. Kahl clarified that this isn't an immediate plan he sees in motion, but that the risk is rising if Russian strategic thinking shifts harder in that direction. Complementing that, Germany's military leadership also weighs in. Lieutenant General Carsten Brewer has said that Russia could be ready to mount an attack on NATO states in 5 to 8 years, depending on how it replenishes and modernizes its forces after the Ukraine war's toll. He warns that Russia is not sending every weapons system to Ukraine. Some is being reserved, stockpiled, or deployed elsewhere in anticipation of a confrontation with the West. Form. So when you put together these warnings from Germany's spymaster and military leadership, you see a common thread that Russian aggression toward NATO may not be just rhetorical, it could become a strategic objective if conditions align. Now, let's dig into how Russia might think about such a decision. First, Russia's war in Ukraine gives it battlefield experience, but it's also drained resources, exposed vulnerabilities, and galvanized Western support for Ukraine. That said, a country like Russia often looks for asymmetric advantages probing defenses, using sabotage and covert operations, testing alliances. The use of hybrid warfare to probe NATO's cohesion is precisely what Kahl and others warn about. Second, strategic buffer zones and the idea of buffer states matter deeply to Russian doctrine. Russia has long considered NATO expansion near its borders a threat. From Moscow's perspective, pushing the frontier westward via peripheral countries under its influence reduces perceived vulnerability. That impulse, mixed with nationalist ambition, might fuel designs on NATO territory. Third, timing, force readiness, and deterrence calculus all come into play. An outright invasion of NATO territory would risk retaliation from multiple members, including the U.S. Russia would have to believe it has the military capability to strike swiftly, inflict damage, and possibly coerce a diplomatic settlement before the alliance fully mobilizes. If the alliance looks disunited or slow to respond, that perception could encourage aggression. Fourth, political will matters. Russia must judge that NATO and individual European states might hesitate to engage in full-scale war, especially given the risks of escalation, including nuclear escalation. Leaders calculating public sentiment, defense costs, and strategic patience will influence whether Moscow sees an opportunity. That leads us to the counterargument. Is an attack truly inevitable, or is that hype? Inevitable implies almost deterministic inevitability, the idea that no matter what NATO does, the attack will come. That's an extreme framing. That said, the warnings seem aimed less at prophecy and more at caution. If Russia's strategic trajectory continues unchecked, the risk could cross a threshold. What factors might check or delay such a move? NATO's collective defense guarantee is one, Article 5, which states that an attack on one is an attack on all, is a powerful deterrent, though the strength of that deterrent depends on both perception and credibility. If Moscow doubts the will of NATO states to respond, or believes there will be divisions in response, the kind of probing attacks Kahl warns about become more tempting. Also, logistical challenges, international sanctions, internal stability, and the burdens of extended occupation make any large-scale invasion costly. Russia's existing war with Ukraine is already stretching its military and economic resilience. Expansion of conflict to additional fronts, especially against NATO members, dramatically increases the risks. Then there's public and alliance cohesion. If NATO and EU states maintain unity, ramp up defense spending, secure supply chains, deepen intelligence sharing, and shore up eastern flank security, they make the inevitable much harder to achieve. So in practice, what might this look like in phases or patterns? Phase 1 may be further hybrid operations, cyber attacks, infrastructure sabotage, influence campaigns, false flags, and localized provocations. These erode resilience and confusion before kinetic operations begin. Phase 2 could involve rapid but limited incursions, taking small border zones, deploying special forces, or seizing territory under the pretext of protecting Russian minorities. That kind of salami-slicing tactic tests how NATO responds. Call explicitly warns that Russia may not seek grand land gains, but might aim to test red lines. Phase 3 might expand to conventional force operations if resistance is weak or fractured. That's the full-blown attack scenario that Germany's military warns about. Now, let's examine specific challenges NATO and Europe face if such a scenario were to approach. First, speed of response. Fast, coordinated reaction among NATO members is essential. Delays, debates, or split messaging embolden aggression. Second, deterrence posture. Europe needs credible and forward, stationed forces, modern equipment, integrated air and missile defense, and intelligence capacities. Without that, Russia may view gaps or weak states as soft targets. Third, supply lines and logistics. Defense is partly about sustaining ammunition, fuel, spare parts, reinforcements. Over time, attrition will matter. Fourth, public resolve and democratic cohesion. Wartime decisions require political backing even when trade-offs and casualties arise. Fifth, escalation control. Any aggression against NATO carries risk of escalation, potentially to nuclear thresholds. Diplomacy must be ready to manage that risk. Also, information warfare and narrative matters. In the early days, controlling the story framing an attack as justified or defensive matters for international support and domestic morale. One important nuance, attacking NATO is qualitatively different than attacking a non-allied neighbor. NATO states are protected under mutual defense, and an attack would almost certainly trigger a military response from multiple major powers. That raises stakes dramatically. Hence, Russia would only do so if confident, rightly or wrongly, that it can manage escalatory risk or prevail quickly. Turning to the question of credibility, are the German warnings overly pessimistic? Some may argue, yes, that they serve to prod NATO countries into higher defense spending or political unity, but the data is worrying. Russia continues to inject large volumes of military hardware, tanks, artillery, drones into its apparatus, not all of which is committed to Ukraine, indicating stockpiling or reserve buildup. The hybrid operations against Western countries are ongoing: cyber intrusions, sabotage operations, espionage, influence operations. Kohl views this as part of the trajectory toward a potential conflict threshold. In short, the warnings are not necessarily alarmism, but early signals from security professionals observing patterns of escalation. The question isn't whether Russia could attack NATO. It clearly could under certain configurations, but whether it will decide to, and whether NATO is prepared enough to deter or defend. So what must NATO, Europe, and the world do in response? Some key prescriptions: strengthen deterrence credibility, forward positioning, realistic war plans, stronger force posture on the eastern flank, integrated arms systems, joint exercises, deepen alliance unity. Political, diplomatic, military coherence matters. Countries that act in isolation or resist sharing weaken deterrence, invest in resilience, cybersecurity, energy security, critical infrastructure hardening, secure supply chains. Enhance intelligence and early warning, detect hybrid attacks and disruptions and respond before escalation. Be clear publicly about defense commitments. If aggressors doubt the political will to respond, deterrence erodes. Maintain back channels for diplomacy even in crises. Escalation control needs communication even in conflict. Support Ukraine robustly. The outcome there is a proving ground. A weakened Russia is less capable of broader aggression. A resurgent Russia is more emboldened. In conclusion, is a Russian attack on NATO inevitable, not in the sense of fate, but the trajectory points toward increasing risk? The German spy chief's warning is serious. It's a call to recognize that without proactive deterrence, the thresholds between hybrid conflict and conventional war may blur. We may be watching the early chapters of a long test of resolve. The next decade is pivotal whether Europe and NATO can reinforce deterrence, preserve unity, and stay ahead of aggression. If they fail, an attack on NATO may slip from hypothetical to real. Thank you for following this. If you found this breakdown useful, please like, share, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you think. Is this imminent danger or strategic posturing?